Recording started.
Well, I want to welcome you, everyone that was able to come to our webinar tonight. Tonight we're going to be discussing some test-taking strategies and have a question and answer session. My name is Kathleen Griffioon. I'm one of the instructors for Creation Studies, and I'm here with Dr. David DeWitt. He's the chair of the Biology and Chemistry Department at Liberty, and he's also the director of the Center for Creation Studies, and he's the creator of the Creation Studies class. So tonight we wanted to take some time to review some test-taking strategies that we've noticed some students have not been using in our class. There's lots of test-taking strategies out there that people could share with you, and we'd be happy to give more specific tips, and I'm sure your instructors can help you as well, your instructors specific to each of your sections. But we wanted to go over some things that we've noticed that might help the students in our class that aren't just general study or test-taking strategies, but some strategies for this class in particular. And I'll also be going over some test questions from the previous exams and showing you the rationale for the question and where you would find the answer in the course materials. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just a second. Okay. Can you see my screen, Dr. DeWitt?
Yes.
Okay, then it's working. So the first thing I wanted to explain to everyone is just the rationale for the amount of study time it takes for a class like Creation Studies. So in online classes, we try to make the online classes comparable to what a residential course would be because students get online degrees. And so the course really online should be the same as it is residentially. So if you have an online course that's 8 weeks and 3 credits, that would be equivalent to a 6-hour class time that a residential student would have to actually attend 6 hours of class in a week, and they would be expected to be spending 6 hours outside of class working on their materials. And so what this means is that success in the class, an online class like this, requires 10 to 12 hours that the student is actually engaged in the course. That's including your time spent watching your presentations, reading your assigned books, and studying the material on your own. This was actually broken down. This can actually be broken down into how much time you're spending on each thing. So students would be expected to spend 3 hours watching the presentations and videos and taking notes, about an hour reading the chapters, an hour doing discussion boards or other like written assignments for that week. And then on top of that, so those would be the things in the class that you'd be expected, but on top of that, they would be calculating 3 hours for watching the presentations a second time, 1 to 3 hours actually reviewing all the materials and studying, and then 30 minutes taking the exam. So it's not really a class that you can just watch the presentations and take the exam straight after. There might be some online courses that are like that, but it's not really the way that it's intended to be taken. So some suggestions for preparing for a test for a class like this. Outside of suggestions, general suggestions like repetition, understanding what your learning mode is. Different people learn differently. Some people learn by writing. Some people learn by watching the presentation or hearing it. So everyone has their own way to learn. But outside of that, when you're preparing for a test, the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is watching the presentations and taking notes and filling in the EPAC. So the EPAC is designed to allow you to follow along with the presentation and make sure that you're not missing anything. But there's also things that Dr. DeWitt says in the presentation that aren't a fill-in-the-blank in the EPAC that can end up on the quiz or a test. So you should take notes not just on the fill-in-the-blanks, but if there's other things that he's explaining, those would be good things to take notes on as well. And one useful thing in the presentations on the Creation Studies website is that there's a notes tab that actually gives you written out what Dr. DeWitt is saying. And so this is really useful if you're a visual person that you'd like to read and see what he's, and learn by reading, then you can actually go back over and read what he said and make sure you didn't miss anything. The second thing would be, after you watch the presentations, would be to read the assigned chapters and take notes. A lot of the questions on the exams are coming from the chapters. The chapters oftentimes reiterate what Dr. DeWitt's already said in the presentations, and it gives more detail and more examples. When we went and looked back on a few of the chapters from the first 2 modules, about 50% of the students from this term haven't even accessed the chapters on the Creation Studies website. So this could be a big problem when they get to the test. If there's a question from something in the text that isn't necessarily straight from the presentation, then you won't know the answer because you didn't read the book. And even if you did just read it once, some of the questions expect you to be able to understand the concept in a detailed way. And so that would require you to have looked at the chapter more than once or more than just scanning it one time. After you've read the assigned chapters, the next thing would be to watch the assigned videos and take notes on them. And after you've done all of the required materials, then you should be going back over and reviewing your notes over the next days. Read the chapter again. If it helps you to watch the course materials again, then you can watch the presentations again or the videos to review, because with an open book test, when we write the test, we don't write it so you can just search the chapter and find the answer very quickly, or search through your EPAC and find the fill in the blank. We want to know that you've understood the material, you've integrated it, and you're able to answer a question that isn't just a line out of the EPAC, because anyone could do that. We could, if we were just taking all the questions from a fill in the blank in the EPAC, then you wouldn't actually have to watch the presentations. You could just get an EPAC that's already been filled in. So we really want, when we're writing the test, we're really testing for your understanding of the material. Some suggestions that I would have for taking the test, the first would be don't rush through the questions. It's a little bit more difficult because we have the test set up so you get the questions one at a time. But 50% of the students on exam 1, just looking at my 3 sections that I have, showed me that 50% of the students in our classes took 25 minutes or less to complete exam 1. And so you're given 45 minutes to complete exam 1, so that's 20 minutes that you could have used. So in general, for each question, you have about 1.5 minutes per question. For each exam, you have about 1.5 minutes per question. In weeks 2, 4, and 6, there's an essay question on the exam, and for those tests, it's slightly reduced the amount of time you have. It's to about 1.3 minutes per question. So if some questions won't take 1.5 minutes or a whole minute to answer because they're more straightforward and they don't require as much integration of the material. So if you keep a timer on your own, and you watch the time, not just with Blackboard, but maybe write down some markers for yourself about, okay, when I get to minute 15, this is how many questions I should have answered, then you have a better idea of how many minutes you have left to do the rest of the test. And that might help you use your time more wisely when you're answering questions. And another suggestion I would have would be to read the questions very carefully. Some students might read a question too quickly and end up answering true instead of false when a phrase in the question might change the meaning of it. So an example might be difference between millions or billions can change the answer whether it's true or false. Another example would be evolution assumes organisms will decrease in complexity over time. The word decrease is what makes this a false statement. Evolution assumes that organisms will increase in complexity over time. So, but if you read it very quickly, it sounds right, and so you might write true. So slowing down, reading the questions carefully will help a lot of students be more successful when they're taking the exams. So I wanted to go over I picked 2 questions from each of the first 3 exams, and I wanted to show you where the answers were coming from. All of the questions I've selected were questions that most of the students answered incorrectly. So I wanted to pick questions that weren't just straightforward, you know, who did this or who said this, but questions that students struggled with. So hopefully by showing you where it came from in the material, it will help you understand the level that you need to understand the material, and also to see how the questions are derived from the material. So the first question from exam 1 reads, the creation model proves that God directed the origin of man. True or false? So the answer to this question is false, and it's taken from the presentation 2D in week 1, where Dr. DeWitt talks about, can you prove that creation is true? This isn't a question that has a fill in the blank in the EPAC. It's something that he talked about, that no, we cannot prove that the creation model is true, just as we can't prove that the evolution model is true. And so this is something that is definitely talked about in the class, but that you would have to have watched the presentation and understood what Dr. DeWitt has talked about on this, through this presentation, that you can't prove that creation is true. This is another question from exam 1 that a lot of students answered incorrectly. So the question is, which of the following statements is true? A, science is the only way to determine truth. B, naturalism provides evidence that evolution is an unguided process. C, belief in the supernatural impedes scientific investigation. D, science is the process of seeking naturalistic explanations for phenomenon. And E, none of the above are true statements. So I want to take you through each of the answers, the possible answers that are given here, and show you why each one of them is true or false. So the first one, science is the only way to determine truth. This statement is taken from the book. This is chapter 2. I believe it's I think it's the very first paragraph of the chapter. And here Dr. DeWitt says, science is not the only way of knowing or discerning truth. So that cannot be the right answer because it's a false statement. The second one, naturalism provides evidence that evolution is an unguided process, I believe is on the next page. All of these options are taken from the same section of the book. So here, Dr. DeWitt's talking about what naturalism can or cannot show. This whole section is about naturalism. And here he says, scientists often assert that evolution is an unguided process. But how can anyone use the scientific method to demonstrate that evolution is unguided? The fact is that it cannot be done. So that would mean that this statement is also false, and it cannot be the correct selection. The next one, belief in the supernatural impedes scientific investigation. A little bit later on in the chapter, Dr. DeWitt has a whole paragraph talking about great discoveries and significant contributions that have been made by people who were creationists and that believed in a creator. And so this suggests that belief in the supernatural does not impede scientific investigation, that believing in supernatural events does not hinder our ability to do science. The last option was science as a process of seeking naturalistic explanations for phenomena. I think that this is the option that was most often chosen as the true statement. However, it's not. If we go back to the book where it speaks about naturalism, Dr. DeWitt's talking about naturalism and how scientists try to make naturalism what science actually is. And so here he says, many modern scientists have attempted to define science in strictly naturalistic terms. They say that science is the process of seeking naturalistic explanations for phenomena. So this is where I've taken the sentence from. But this definition also implies that only naturalistic explanations should be considered by reasonable, educated people. So science itself is not the process of seeking naturalistic explanations for phenomena. It's seeking explanations for phenomena, but not only naturalistic explanations.
And
so
Dr.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. DeWitt.
Earlier in that chapter, I gave the definition of science as being a way of knowing as well. So that's the other piece to that one.
So it's an additional, so that would also make this not a good definition of science.
Right.
Right. So the answer to this question is E, none of the above are true statements. So the first question I chose from exam 2 is true or false, the Bible proves the existence of God. So this is also a question that's taken from the book. It's from chapter 3, which was part of the assigned reading from that, from week 2. And here the first few sentences from the chapter, the Bible does not set out to prove the existence of God, nor does it provide arguments and evidence to prove that God created the heavens and earth. They're assumed. So this is also something that we talked about in week 1, even though this is a question from week 2, that we can't prove things like the existence of God. We can't prove that creation is true. We can't prove that evolution is true. These are all things that we take on faith. So the answer to this question is false. This is another question that very few people got correct, and it's taken directly from the book. So the question is, which of the following is an argument used to support the framework hypothesis? A, Genesis 1 uses preterite verbs throughout. B, the Hebrew word haytah is translated became. C, the Hebrew word yom can mean lifetime. D, anthropomorphisms are used to describe God. Or E, none of the above. So the first one, that Genesis 1 uses preterite verbs throughout, is actually an objection against the framework hypothesis. So in the chapter, A Day is a Day, here it is, objection 5. Dr. DeWitt talks about how the fact that in Hebrew grammar that preterite verbs are used argues against the framework hypothesis that everything in Genesis 1 is an allegory. So this could not be the correct answer. The second one, the Hebrew word haytah is translated became, is actually an argument for the gap theory. So under the section about the gap theory, argument 2, here Dr. DeWitt talks about the use of the word haytah and how the different translations of it are used as an argument for the gap theory. The third option, the Hebrew word yom can mean lifetime, is actually an argument for the day-age theory. And here on page, I guess it's 8 in the PDF of the ebook, it talks about how yom can mean lifetime and that this is something that day-age advocates often use as an evidence for their theory. The correct answer is actually D, that anthropomorphisms are used to describe God. And here it's one of the bolded arguments for the framework hypothesis that they use the fact that there are anthropomorphisms to describe God to say it's really just an allegory and that we can't take it literally. So this is a question that was directly from the book. It's not a question that is directly from one line of the book. It assumes that you've read the material, all of the material, you studied the material, and so you would be able to quickly identify where these arguments or objections are coming from, and so you know which one is actually used for the framework hypothesis. In exam 3, the first question I've chosen is sickle cell anemia. A is an example of macroevolution. B is a true beneficial mutation. C is a balanced polymorphism. Or D is a result of drug resistance in bacteria. Or E, none of the above. And so this is another question that was straight from the book. And the answer is C, is a balanced polymorphism. Here in this section talking about sickle cell anemia is the bolded definition, balanced polymorphism, and it talks about how sickle cell anemia is actually an example of a balanced polymorphism. And finally, the last one I chose from exam 3 that a lot of people missed was, according to natural selection, each population has a potentially unlimited reproductive capacity, true or false. So this is another question taken straight from the book. Here it's talking about Darwin's observations that came together to give his theory of natural selection. And the first point of it is that each population has a potentially unlimited reproductive capacity. So this is another question that was straight from the book. So now I'm going to open it up to questions from students, and Dr. DeWitt and I could answer your question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because it's the only way that I can see questions that students submit. Just a second. Can you still see my screen?
I don't see the screen.
Okay. So I see that some people have already submitted questions, and that's great. I need to read them. But if you're on your computer, you should be able to see there's a little text box at the bottom right-hand side where you can type in a question. And so I can read the question, either Dr. DeWitt or I could answer it for you. Let me see. Someone asked, is there a way to print out the notes included in the video lectures? There aren't any subtitles or notes for the actual video lectures of Dr. DeWitt or other people. There's a few, I don't know if we've had any that weren't just you, Dr. DeWitt, yet, any videos. But we don't have subtitles available for them, and there's no way to print out notes from them. So for the videos, you'd have to take your own notes. For the presentations, the notes that are, if you meant the notes that are in the presentations, like the PowerPoint presentations that Dr. DeWitt has, I don't think there's a way to copy them or to print them out. Do you know, Dr. DeWitt?
I'm not sure. I'm actually checking to see. It might be that you can right-click copy, but you'd have to do that each individual slide separately.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that would be
if there is a way to do it. If there was a way to do it, I'm sure that would be helpful for students that learn by reading. But
yeah, it would be a lot of effort, and I don't know that it would be any better than just reading it out on the screen.
Okay, so I'm not sure if there's a way. You'd have to try and highlight it, I guess, and see if you can copy it somehow. I've never tried to do it. Dr. DeWitt, we have another question. I'll let you answer this one. It says, is it possible to give us all the questions at once so that we know how to handle our time on each question?
No, we don't do that. We don't allow that option anymore. And that's a decision to uphold the academic integrity of the course.
Well, there's another question that's related to it. The student asked if there wasn't a way for them to go back and change their answer during an exam if they remember or came across the correct answer. Because right now the tests are set up questions one at a time, and they can't backtrack and go back and change answers.
Right, and that's why they have a minute and a half to answer the question. So it should be that they take their time and be sure of the answer before they submit it.
And I think that, since the tests are open book, open notes, if you've studied it, then you'll know where to go back and find the answer if you can't remember exactly, and you need to confirm a detail for yourself.
Right, and with a minute and a half, there should be time to do that if you have read through the chapter carefully.
Right. And the ebook even has a search bar in it, so if you needed to search to find it quickly, you could even do that. So one of the students asked why they weren't allowed to purchase the textbook instead of doing the reading online. And I think this probably relates to the book update.
Oh, the book can be purchased. The new book is available for purchase, and there's a link at and it says, I think it's order a print copy of Unraveling the Origins Controversy.
That's right.
Yeah.
You can purchase the book. There's a link on the Creation Studies website. Also on Blackboard under Week 1, Reading and Study, there's a small presentation called Getting Started. And this goes through how to get started in the course. And one of the slides on that actually has like an arrow that shows you where you can purchase the book. So if you want to go back, if you want to purchase the textbook, a hard copy of it so you can take notes or do your reading in an actual book instead of using the ebook, you can go there. And if you're still having trouble, you can ask your instructor, and I'm sure they can help you find the link to buy the book. Another student asked, I guess I would ask you, Dr. DeWitt, did I miss anything? Do you have any more suggestions for improving their score for the exams they have left in the course?
Well, as we kind of discussed these, this is really the way that the course was intended to be done. When it was developed, it was meant to take 10 to 12 hours worth of student engagement per week. And that might seem like a lot, but the class is twice as fast as a regular course. And you know, if you were taking a class on campus and all you did was go to the lectures and then try to take the test, you might not have that high of a grade. And so because this is online in 8 weeks, it's twice as fast. So you should be doing a lot of the review. And then the questions, as we've developed the questions, they do require some thought. They require that you have engaged the material, and they shouldn't be taken really quickly. So because there's a minute and a half per question, they shouldn't try to take it in 20 seconds. They shouldn't answer a question in 20 seconds without really making sure that, yes, I know this is the right answer.
Just a second. There was a question that was kind of related to that. One of the students asked why they're not allowed to review the questions after they finish the test.
Well, they are able to ask the instructor. They can check in with the instructor and have it that way. That becomes a teachable moment, because if the student doesn't understand why they got a question wrong, the instructor can explain why they got it wrong. And doing it this way upholds the academic integrity of the course and the exams.
So if you finish your test and you think there might have been a problem with it, you can ask your instructor to go back and check your exam for you and make sure nothing was miskeyed or that Blackboard didn't save some of your answers. I'm sure your instructors would be happy to do that for you. These instructors can, by email, tell you the topics of the questions you missed, which might identify an area of the text you didn't understand. If you missed 3 questions on natural selection, then you probably should go back and review natural selection. If you want to talk to your instructor personally, you can talk to them personally. Most instructors will talk to you on the phone or if they're residential and you're residential, if your online instructor is a residential professor, I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you come to their office and speak to them directly as well. So if you want to know anything about your exam, you should contact your instructor if you're worried about the results afterwards. Another question was, are all the questions related either to the book or the notes of the videos? Yes, the questions are taken from the book, the questions are taken from the presentations, but also the presentations, by the presentations I mean the, like the PowerPoint presentations with Dr. DeWitt's voiceover on them. But we also have some actual videos for the course. There's a few videos that are, they're not too long, they're like 20 minutes, 30 minutes long, that talk about one of the topics. Some of them are videos with Dr. DeWitt at the Smithsonian. Some of them are videos from other institutions that there's like a, I think in week 4 is the rate video. So questions are also taken from the videos. So you need to watch the videos and you need to take notes on them, especially if they're listing something. That's always a good thing to write down. If they're talking about specific characteristics of something, that would be something else I would write down, because there will be questions on the exams from the videos. There was another question about if there's any extra credit. Unfortunately, in the College of General Studies, we're not allowed to give extra credit in our courses. However, you do get 50 points for completing the Worldview pre-test and post-test, and those are not graded, they're just surveys. Also your discussion boards are something that's a subjective assignment, so that's another way to show that you've integrated the information. The essays on the tests are also an opportunity for you to gain more points because they're not a multiple choice question. And also your interview paper is worth 50 points. That's due week 7. And grades on those are usually high because you've had the entire term to integrate the material and be able to respond to those questions. Someone asked, if you're in an 8-week course, can you change over to a 16-week version at this point in the semester? Online creation studies isn't offered as a 16-week version. It's only offered in a 16-week version on campus. So if you're a residential student, I believe that you could drop the online course and take it in a residential format, but you probably would have to wait until next semester. Although I'm not an expert on what you can or can't do residentially, so you should probably talk to your advisor and find out your options for that. One of the students said that they came across missing information during one of the presentations. One of the presentations during week 4 was missing 3 slides. Renee, why don't you go ahead and send that information to me so I know? You can email it, just reply to the email that I sent out with the information for the webinar, or you can contact your professor and let them know, and they'll get that information to me. And we'll make sure that whether any questions from the test came from that, or we can find a way to rectify that.
Yeah, I think I know what that's talking about, and there shouldn't be any questions from that. It's unless it's covered in the textbook, because I know what that's referring to, and those slides were dropped, but the text wasn't removed from the e-pack.
Okay. So when Renee sends it to me, then we can make sure that if there were any questions on the test from that, and if it was also in the, sometimes there's overlap in the book for what those slides were too. So we'll have to check and see and make sure that it's okay with the test bank. One of the students asked about when they review the test with the instructor, they can't see all the correct answers. So we'll have to send out instructions to the instructors about how to access all the correct answers on Blackboard so you can see. Let me see. I have some questions that I need to talk to students individually about. The essay question, one student asked how are the essay questions evaluated. The essay questions are, there's no rubric for the essay questions. Those are evaluated by your professor. So if you have a question about the points you received on it or how it was evaluated, you should contact your instructor directly for your section. And Madge, with your question, if you could email me directly with your question, then I can get back to you about that and I can make sure that you get a response on your Quiz 1 review. Okay, let me just make sure. Are there any other questions before we close the webinar? If you have any questions about the course materials, Dr. DeWitt can answer those. Okay, there's another question. Someone asked, is there any way to see why we missed the fill-in-the-blank question? Sometimes we type the right answer, but there was a typo. So for the fill-in-the-blank questions, you do have to have correct spelling to get it right. Sometimes, because Blackboard grades them automatically, sometimes it's looking for a two-word combination, but you just put one word. But it's obvious that you knew the right answer. You just filled in one word instead of two. And your instructor can check those and give you credit if you actually put the right answer, but it didn't give you credit for it.